I always bring out David Mamet, who's, genius at dialogue, and he said once, nobody says anything unless they want something.
Dialogue is about intention. It's about characters in stories want things all the time from the other characters that they're not getting. All of the characters. That's what produces conflict, right? Everyone knows conflict is kind of a necessity of drama. The reason there's conflict is because we don't have the things that we want. And so the best and easiest way to write dialogue is to focus in on what your character wants from the other character. And all of the characters have these intentions. It's not just your protagonist. I tend to know my protagonist's intentions pretty naturally because I have a strong sense of the character and I don't really have to think about it too consciously when I write a scene. Immediately she'll have a strong intention. I don't have to be conscious. I will have to often be conscious about the other characters because they're not there just to serve your protagonist or your needs for the protagonist, right? They also have to have things they want that they don't have. And that's the key. That is the simplest, strongest way to write dialogue is to be aware of that, is that characters don't have things that they want. And sometimes they talk about it directly, sometimes they don't talk about it directly, right? But the words that are coming out of their mouth are not necessarily related to their want. I mean, they may not say it directly.
First thing you have to understand about dialogue is that it's got to be connected to the character's desire line in the scene. In other words, if a character has an objective, an intention in the scene, the dialogue has to match that intention. And what I see a lot of times, especially with exposition and information, is that a character is saying all that information, and you can tell that it's really the writer's objective. In other words, the writer wants the audience to know this information because they think, okay, the audience needs to know this and this and this and this, so the character is going to say this and this and this and this. And that doesn't work because scenes and dialogue are about a character's intention in the scene. Everything a character says is matched to what that desire line is. So anything that doesn't belong to that doesn't fit. And you can tell whether it's the writer wanting to know that information, wanting the audience to know that information, whether it's part of the character.
If you are writing a story, you may be interested in our new book, the sponsor of today's video. After months of working on a story, have you ever said to yourself, I don't know what my main character wants. Why are my side characters more interesting than my main character? 17 Steps is a workbook-style tool with specific questions to help you dive deep into your main character and story. We've linked up to 17 steps below. Now, back to the video.
The external goal is their action goal, their physical goal that they need to achieve, kind of like the A story goal. Maybe it's the most obvious or most visual goal. And then the internal, like it says, it's going to be more emotional. It might be the love interest, it might be their family, or it might be just kind of a secondary active goal, but it's not as important as the external. Unless later they flip and maybe the internal becomes more important than the external. If you know your character's external and internal goal, I think it's really going to help you write your dialogue, because then you're writing their dialogue to show what they want and to get them actively toward their goal. We're essentially selfish people, so when we speak, it's because we're trying to get somewhere, we're trying to get something, so it really helps to know their goals.
Nobody's going to say, hey, I'm a trustworthy character. Right? I mean, if somebody said that to you, you're going to be thinking, whoa, why is he telling me this, right? There's always a reason. Why? So there's always a reason. And if we know what the reason is in the movie, if you know what the character wants, or you're trying to figure out what the character wants, that's more interesting than somebody dumping exposition.
But what you can't get away with is writing dialogue without intentions. And the thing is, it makes it so easy to write. That's the good news. You just ask yourself, what are my character's intention? this character, and I like I said, I like to phrase it in terms of what does the one character want from the other character, and it should be specific. Like, I'm not a fan of loosey-goosey, oh, they want respect. No, I want this person to listen to me right now, right? So real specific, intentions. And the beauty of that is the scenes write themselves. If I just establish, okay, this is this character's intention, that character's intention, I'm just transcribing. I just hear the characters argue with each other. It makes it really easy to write once you know that. It's particularly a requirement if you have a lot of exposition. Because if you don't have intentions, we know that it's just about exposition. Like, there should never be a scene there just because you want us to know something. Now, that said, you're probably going to have some scenes every now and then that are there just because you want us to know something. But you got to hide that. You got to hide that by the fact that people have really strong intentions. And so I'm not noticing, it doesn't reek of exposition to me because the characters have very forceful things that they want from each other. And so the exposition comes out like as a little byproduct of what they're saying. And so it feels natural. If you don't have intentions and people are talking in exposition, then immediately it'll reek of that. And it'll, particularly a writer will notice, even non-writers will notice, is like, this is really boring. Why are these people just, telling me a bunch of stuff? But if you have intentions, we're not going to notice that, or we're not going to notice as much.
Characters who just dump exposition, it's just boring because it's not connected to a desire line. Even characters who disagree with each other, even though that might be kind of interesting because there's some tension there, if we don't know what they want, it's going to be boring. So you see this a lot with amateur scenes of people like, oh, I need conflict, so my character is just going to argue, and so you have the people arguing back and forth, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just right because we don't know what they want. And that's really what makes something interesting, is intention and obstacle to that.